This program sponsored in part by Amtrak's Coast Starlight, traveling between Los Angeles and Seattle. You reach your destination the moment you step aboard.
A ride on the Adirondack is a modern-day adventure into the scenic and romantic heartland of America's history. The rails run along the fabled Hudson Valley, the home of Rip Van Winkle, the Headless Horseman, and some of the richest and most powerful people in the nation's annals. The Adirondack region, for which the train is named, has an abundance of recreational opportunities and architectural treasures. Its hills and valleys, lakes and streams resonate with the echoes of American legends. It's an unforgettable journey filled with serenity, beauty, and the wondrous works of man and of nature. A northbound journey on the Adirondack begins at New York City's Penn Station. The cavernous depot links long-distance passenger, commuter, and New York City's subway trains. It's one of the oldest and busiest rail terminals in America.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen, I have your attention, please. All passengers boarding Amtrak over there at Adirondacks, train number 69, and with the Montreal Canada, scheduled to depart at 8:30.
Good morning. Where are you headed to? Albany. Either coach here, please. Albany? Either coach, please. Good morning. Ryan, clip into your right, please. Albany, and here to your left. You can seats both sides. Into your right, please. Good morning. Are you with that group? Okay, they'll be in here to your left. Mrs. Baker, nice to see you. How you doing? Nice joining. I'll talk to you when you get on. Thank you. Nice seeing you again. Okay, straight ahead. Rear end of Amtrak 69 to the head end. All clear on track number 5. Okay to depart New York's Penn Station, sir.
A trip on the Adirondack is a grand adventure. The train carries the traveler north to Montreal in Canada's Quebec province. The journey traverses one of the most historic and beautiful regions in the U.S., the Hudson River Valley and the Adirondack Mountains.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome aboard the Adirondack. It's Amtrak's Empire service from New York's Penn Station to Montreal, Quebec. Again, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride, and welcome aboard the Adirondack.
Right, I think at night.
Conductor Rick Palmer has been railroading for nearly 30 years.
How you doing?
For the last 15 years, he's had the good fortune to work the Hudson Line and the Adirondack.
It's a very interesting job. It's always an adventure, and the people are fantastic. They're what really makes the job, a different type of job.
It's okay. That's all right. We don't throw you off the train anymore. We make you do windows.
And we have a lot of regular riders. We have different people who do a lot of commuting or semi-commuting from the city of New York up to the Adirondacks or up to the Capital District area of New York in the Albany area. We see these people 2-3 times a week, sometimes just once a week, sometimes 5 times a week. And we have other first-time travelers who happen to be on the Adirondack, just like glued to the window, looking at the sights. The Hudson River Valley is very, very scenic, and it's just outside the city of New York, which makes it very, very interesting, especially for people who leave that hustle and bustle of the concrete territory right into this beautiful atmosphere in just less than an hour. New York isn't just the city of New York. We have a very beautiful state here, especially upstate New York, and the Adirondacks State Park is absolutely gorgeous. And to continue on up to Montreal, some of the scenes are breathtaking.
From New York City north to Albany, the Adirondack hugs the spectacular shoreline of the Hudson River. From a window seat on the train, passengers might well see John Cronin at work. In his job as the Hudson River Keeper, Cronin is the link between the public and the river. He investigates polluters, watches for other problems, and most importantly, helps find solutions.
Well, I've been the Hudson River Keeper since 1983, but I've been working on the Hudson since 1974. And it's a great job because it gets me out on the river. I participate in protecting not only the beauty of the Hudson, but the Hudson's culture and the aesthetic resources of the river as well. The section of the Hudson we're in right now is not only one of the most beautiful sections of the river, but it's one of the most historic sections of the river. As you travel through this part of the Hudson, you're traveling along these jagged mountain cliffs, the old rugged Hudson Highlands, and you're looking at them almost the same way that the Native Americans saw them, the same way that the colonists saw them. There's that great sense of taking a trip along the Hudson is taking a trip through American history. I love taking the train on the river, and by far my favorite trip, and of course I'm prejudiced, is along the river, and I never tire of it. It's such a wonderful ride that but the sense that you have is the sense of just being part of that flow. You can almost sit back and imagine yourself instead of being propelled by an engine, being propelled by the flow and current of the Hudson as you're going along the shore.
You had a question?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I had a question. I always pass this castle on the Hudson, that old castle,
Oh, yes.
deserted castle. And I was always wondering what it was. I never knew.
Oh, a lot of people ask that. Actually, that's Bannerman's Arsenal. It was built around the turn of the century by Mr. Bannerman. He was from the European area, around the Rhine area. He actually built it to depict the Rhine area where he's from, and for his wife. The story, as I understand it, is he either died here or went back to Europe and died. In any event, his wife never made it over. It was sort of a sad story. There's been some attempts to reconstruct it and stuff, but I think cost constraints have held that back for a while. So, is there anything else you'd like to know?
Thank you very much.
Well, that's it. I'm glad you asked.
Thanks.
Thank you. You're welcome.
History is a living presence along the tracks of the Adirondack as it travels through the Hudson River Valley. The region embraces the largest concentration of national historic landmarks and romantic landscapes in the United States. Tarrytown, this journey's first stop, provides an opportunity to explore some of the nation's architectural treasures. This is Sleepy Hollow country, a 10-mile stretch along the shore of the Hudson, just a short train ride north of New York City. American author Washington Irving lived here. He's buried in one of the oldest cemeteries in the country. Its gravestones are rumored to have inspired Irving with names for some of the characters in his novels. Rip Van Winkle and Legend of Sleepy Hollow are two of Irving's most beloved stories. They're based on his knowledge of life in the Hudson Valley in the early 19th century.
Welcome to Sunnyside. This is the home of Washington Irving, America's first professional, full-time, internationally recognized author.
Russell Hubbard is one of the interpretive historians at Sunnyside. They provide a living history tour of the author's retreat on the Hudson.
Sunnyside is the culmination of two things, the thinking and planning of Washington Irving, and it is also the romantic ideal of having a cottage retreat of one's own place in the country, surrounded by the beauties and variations of nature. Washington Irving builds Sunnyside because he wants to put down roots in the area that he loves. He is familiar with this area as a teenager. Of the Hudson River, he writes at one point, "I thank God I was born on the banks of the Hudson." Irving is not pleased with the thought of the railroad running past his cottage when the New York and Hudson River Railroad is proposed in 1847. The proposal causes him to complain that if the Garden of Eden were still on Earth, someone would run a railroad right through it. He writes that the train passes at midnight, the engineer blasts the steam trumpet, and as a result, he loses a perfectly good night's sleep. Irving fights the railroad as long as he can, but when he finally succumbs, it is to the temptation of $3,500 in cash, what Irving coins as the almighty dollar, and stock. The railroad gets its right-of-way past the cottage, and Irving becomes ultimately one of its better passengers. Irving writes that the cottage is just a 10-minute walk from the station, and there being only 2 tracks and a dirt walking path along the outer track and the edge of the water, visitors could walk that and then climb a dirt path around the cove in front of the cottage.
Washington Irving's home on the Hudson is just one of several historic estates that can be found in Tarrytown. Lyndhurst is one of America's finest Gothic revival mansions. This marble castle, built in 1838, was the crowning achievement of Alexander Jackson Davis, the most prominent architect of his day. The estate was once owned by Jay Gould, a wealthy railroad tycoon who used it as a summer house. North of town is Phillipsburg Manor, an 18th century trading center, complete with an operating grist mill. Phillipsburg Manor is the starting point for public tours of one of the most remarkable sites in the Hudson Valley, Kykuit. It's the neoclassical mansion that was the home of 4 generations of Rockefellers. Kykuit, which means lookout, was built between 1907 and 1913 on a hilltop site commanding panoramic views of the Hudson River Valley. Around 50,000 people visit Kykuit each year to catch a glimpse of the life of one of the country's most affluent families. John D. Rockefeller, or JDR, the philanthropist, and founder of Standard Oil Company, his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., who commissioned the house for his parents, and grandson Nelson Rockefeller, the former New York governor and U.S. vice president, all lived here. Each left his imprint on the development of this remarkable estate. Henry Joyce is the project director at Kykuit.
This estate at Kykuit is actually one of the last of the great Hudson River estates. The house was built here because John D. Rockefeller, who moved the offices of Standard Oil to New York in the early 1880s and wanted a country house outside of the city. One of his primary interests when he was not working in New York City was to be here and to be playing golf. John D. Rockefeller himself was not a collector of art. He was passionate about the landscape, which is why Kykuit is here on this hilltop site, so that he could play golf. And he created the garden, which we see in the 300 acres of the park all around. His son really commissioned many of the sculptures for the gardens, including the Oceanus figure, the Roman god of the oceans. Junior was more interested in art collecting, and it was his son, Nelson, who was particularly interested in contemporary works of art. Nelson Rockefeller's biggest impact at Kaikit was with the 70 pieces of sculpture that he used in the gardens, which he collected over a 30 or 40-year period, including the major European and American artists of the 1960s and 70s. The Picasso group at Kaikit is called the Bathers, and was inspired by people on the beach in the south of France where Picasso lived. In the Kaikit piece you see a diver about to dive off a diving board and other figures. It's an amazing post-Cubist piece, typical of his repertory at that period. We see at Kaikit also a piece called Spiny by Alexander Calder, which was actually commissioned for the site. You see the sculpture looking towards the Hudson River. It was made in the early 1960s from a sketch that Alexander Calder had made in 1941, which Nelson Rockefeller owned. When he moved to this house, he commissioned a large-scale piece appropriate for the parkland setting and the Hudson River view. The David Smith sculpture called The Banquet was created by the artist Smith up in the Adirondacks in 1951. And the piece was actually inspired by a series of drawings which he did whilst on the train traveling to and from his home in the Adirondacks and New York City. It represents elements of food and drink and the idea of, in a sense, a good life, partly inspired by the images, and you can see some of these ideas in the style of the sculpture itself, of the picturesque landscape of the mountains, and perhaps even the sense of the rail lines as the train moves along the steel rails.
Thank you. I think maybe the train whistle to me is like the sea is to a sailor. Something that's inside me that attracts me, like I'm being pulled by a magnet. It's adventure and something totally different from our normal, pretty much run-of-the-mill lives. You know, it's real adventure.
Michael Rourke is a science teacher from Kingston, New York. He takes over 10 train trips along the Hudson every year. A true rail fan, Mike helped the Hudson River Valley Railroad Society save the historic Hyde Park Station from demolition.
The Hyde Park Station is situated in between the Roosevelt Estate and the Vanderbilt Estate. When it was built in 1914, it was considered locally to be Vanderbilt Station. Mr. Vanderbilt did not use the station. He had his own private platform, naturally, but his family did. The Roosevelts also had their own private platform. Roosevelt, while he was president, really didn't use the building at all. The only time he was ever there during his presidency was with the departure of the King and Queen of England when they visited the Roosevelts in Hyde Park. During that time, by the way, Sarah Roosevelt got extremely angry with both Franklin and Eleanor because they served the King and Queen of England hot dogs, sauerkraut, and beer, and she thought that was totally inappropriate for royalty. King George and Franklin, of course, being the politicians that they were, got out of the trouble they were in by dedicating the state dinner that night to Sarah. So that got them off the hook for the hot dogs and beer that afternoon. Roosevelt's funeral train also stopped at the station. Contrary to the local newspaper reports, his body was not on the train when it got there. They had already taken it off at the estate, but the dignitaries on board the train did continue with the train to the station, disembarked there, and then a funeral cortege went through Hyde Park back down to the estate, which is south of the station.
After extensive restoration, the Railroad Society reopened the Hyde Park Station. In the summer months, visitors can tour the old depot and soak up some of its history. The last stop before leaving the historic Hudson Valley is just north of Hyde Park in the Great Estates region. What may be the grandest of these estates is found at Annandale on Hudson. Montgomery Place is one of the finest surviving examples of a picturesque landscape. It's one of 40 mansions that was built by the Livingston family along a 20-mile stretch of the Hudson. The grounds surrounding the mansion are truly extraordinary. The estate includes over 400 manicured acres of orchards, lawns, and gardens.
They're planted at regular intervals. They're not all the same thing.
Timothy Steinhoff is the director of horticulture at Montgomery Place. He's our guide on a romantic evening tour of the estate.
Every full moon from May through September, we have a very informal walk through the garden at twilight so that people can really enjoy this landscape at its best time of day. The light is very interesting, and as the days cool, the fragrance of the flowers begins to rise, and it culminates with dessert and coffee over on the north pavilion of the house, which is really one of America's first great outdoor living rooms. So it's a real nice chance for people who are interested in gardens or history or architecture to just take in the atmosphere and enjoy being together. Lots of comments back on how it seems to be sort of a little bit lost in time, and the whole evocative sense that all the colors and scents that it really is a sort of out-of-body experience.
Montgomery Place is our final example of the rich history, architecture, and elegance found in the Hudson River Valley. Nearly halfway through its northward excursion, the Adirondack heads towards its namesake mountains and Lake Champlain.
All aboard! All aboard! Hi, big guy. How you doing? Having a good time? You like the train? Well, listen, you have a good ride. If you need anything from me, just give a call. We'll be right up ahead. Okay? Thanks a lot. You're welcome. Bye-bye. Take care. Thanks. Take care, sir. Can I have them for you?
Thanks, Rick.
Got it. Okay. You're welcome, Lillian. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks for the castle explanation. We've been wondering about that for years, by the way.
Okay, great. Watch your step, please.
One of Rick Palmer's regular passengers on the Adirondack is Crystal Baker. Crystal started taking the train 10 years ago. She commuted between her job on Wall Street and her weekend home in Saratoga Springs. Crystal moved to the picturesque old town when she purchased one of its landmark restaurants.
I have the option to drive or fly to New York, back and forth to Saratoga, and there's no way I would ever choose either. The one way to travel, in my mind, is by train. What makes a train a fun way to get around is, I guess, over the years when you see them with regularity, it's social, and then it's also relaxing. Now that I have the restaurant, I spend the time working on my payroll or planning for parties and catering events, because with the water and the views, you can, tune out and be a little more creative and mellow than you are when you're in the restaurant. I just love the general feel of the trip and the fact that you can really relax on the train and have a good time.
Take care. Watch your step, please. Crystal, can I have that for you? Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Very nice to have you
later.
again. Take
Okay,
care.
I'll see you at the restaurant.
Okay, travel with us again soon.
Okay, definitely.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. How was everything?
Everything's fantastic.
Oh, good. Good. Is it your first time in Saratoga, or?
Yep,
Oh, good. Okay, good. Well, I'll see you back soon then. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Thanks. What sets Saratoga Springs apart from other small cities is that the people in the community are here because they really want to be here. They want to have the relationships that you have in a small town, and they care about the physical, beauty and integrity of the city as well. And that's something that is really, that's special. Hattie's features Southern American cuisine. We're the second oldest restaurant in town. We started in 1938. What I think makes Hattie's a really special place, and the kind of place that people will go out of their way to get to, is that looking around, you can see it's a unique environment. The walls are history. From the very first time I met Hattie, and I think other people would concur with this 100%, you get an immediate feeling of warmth and generosity and kindness to others. And that's something that I strive for, daily in running the business, because in carrying on the tradition of food, that's important, but you also have to carry on the tradition of the spirit of the place.
Saratoga Springs has a long and colorful history. It was an important Revolutionary War battle site. The town was primarily settled because of its water. The rare naturally carbonated springs of Saratoga were believed to have healing powers. By the mid-1800s, doctors were touting the water as an elixir for any ailment. Saratoga swiftly became the leading resort of the moneyed. They came to take the waters at the Queen of Spas, either by soaking in it or drinking it in the elegant Hall of Springs. From the Hall of Springs to the Sport of Kings, Saratoga remains an exciting summer resort.
Trying to get to the lead, so is Indomable.
Its name evokes images of elegant gentility surrounding the thrill and majesty of thoroughbred horse racing. For more than 130 years, the summer races at Saratoga have attracted some of the most famous horses and jockeys. Crowds of fans nearly doubled the town's population.
Horse racing is a kind of a unique sport. A lot of places they play baseball, a lot of places they play football or golf or whatever. There aren't a lot of places where they have horse racing, but more importantly, there aren't a lot of places where the tradition of horse racing goes back as far as it does here, and that the track is such an old institution. And that culture and the horse set is part of the development of the city, and you feel it everywhere you go. It feels like you're back in a different era.
Actor David Hyde Pierce grew up in Saratoga Springs. He's known for his role as Niles Crane on the Emmy Award-winning television series Frasier.
I think if you get on the train, you have to get off at Saratoga. It's unmissable because it's such a unique combination of things. It was sort of formed as a spa resort and still has that element, and you can go and do that. You have to see the Bachelor Mansion. It's a bizarre, unique, and wonderful example of elaborate Victorian architecture. As well as all of the magnificent houses around town. If you just drive around town, that's one thing you have to do. Certainly go to the races if it's racing season. In the larger sense, it's a place where people can come and just soothe themselves in a beautiful setting, in an unusually rich cultural environment of the ballet and the orchestra, and still have the quiet of a small town. I'm not joking when I say if you get off the train, there's a very good chance you'll want to live here.
With more adventures ahead, the journey continues. The route of the Adirondack out of Saratoga traces the eastern border of Adirondack Park, encompassing over 6 million acres. Adirondack Park is the largest state park in the country. It's bigger than Yellowstone or Yosemite. It's just about equal in size to the whole state of Vermont. Surprisingly, less than half of the land within its boundaries is owned by the state of New York. The park is a unique mixture of public and private land. Gary Randorf is the executive director of the Adirondack Council, which tracks land use regulations within the park. An avid outdoorsman and a landscape and nature photographer, Gary has lived in the Adirondacks for more than 25 years.
There's every type of outdoor recreation you can think of here. The wilderness is so accessible. That's the big difference between the Adirondacks and, let's say, some of the national parks in the West, is the mountain range is always a long ways away. Here you just drive to a trailhead and park your car and step into the woods, and you're in wilderness in moments. And you have the sense that you're hundreds of miles away from civilization, and yet you're not. The thing that's unique about the Adirondack Park is, I believe, it's a park that you can live in. And you can live in it because over 50% of it is privately owned. But when you agree to live in it, you're going to have certain restrictions on what you can do with your land and that sort of thing. It's a balancing act to try to preserve the park's character and the feeling of open space and rural, but at the same time allow for some growth. We're struggling to find the right balance, and I think we're pretty close to achieving it.
Within easy distance of the tracks, there are many opportunities to discover the Adirondacks. Each September, one of the most colorful and popular events of the area occurs in Glens Falls, the Adirondack Balloon Festival. One of the largest balloon festivals in the country, it attracts hundreds of hot air balloonists and thousands of spectators to the southern foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. Further up the rails, scenic views of Lake Champlain begin to appear. One of the most popular attractions at the south end of the lake is historic Fort Ticonderoga. A star-shaped fortress, Ticonderoga was one in a series of strategically placed 18th century military sites that commanded Lake Champlain.
Out to the west and north for the better part of a mile, you have roughly concentric lines of fortifications. Things like redoubts and batteries, little mini forts, connected often by a covered way, which is a ditch about the height of a man, and it allows you to move easily back and forth among these fortifications without being observed. The fortress has a central structure that's a rectangle. On each corner, you see a diamond-shaped bastion. And those are very useful devices. They give you pretty much 100% visibility all the way around the edge of the fort. You can see everyone and anything that goes by, but it can also be used as a point of last defense. But the stone fortress is really the centerpiece of the whole complex. It was originally built of logs and earth, and it's built upon bedrock. The bedrock is a lovely thing because you can't tunnel underneath this fort to attack it. It's a very good protective device. So everything here was meant to protect itself. The spacing of the bastions is such that they'll never be more than 200 yards apart. That means the lines of musket fire cross over all the way around the walls.
1, 2, 3.
Fort Ticonderoga was at the heart of the struggle for control of North America. It was originally built by the French in 1755 to block the British from taking control of Lake Champlain during the 7 Years' War. 20 years later, it proved significant when Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold led a successful dawn raid on the British-controlled fort, giving America its first victory in the struggle for independence. Amazingly, although it was attacked 6 times in 2 wars, Fort Ticonderoga never suffered a direct assault. Reconstructed in 1908, Fort Ticonderoga is one of the main visitor attractions along the rail line. Once considered the key to the continent, it is today a gateway to the Adirondacks. The conductor on the northern part of the journey is Craig Allen. The son and grandson of railroad engineers, Craig has worked on trains for nearly 25 years. He enjoys spending time with his regular Adirondack passengers and those taking the train for the first time.
Well, I think there's two main reasons why somebody would choose this train over another train or even possibly another form of transportation. The first reason, the obvious reason, is the scenery and the history that surrounds it. It's considered one of the top 10 scenic rail adventures in North America. When you overlook Lake Champlain, it's breathtaking there. The scenery just seems to escalate as you go higher till you get past Westport. Then it just gets very, very beautiful. You can't say that there's a specific time of the year when it's more beautiful than another, because it's really beautiful all year round. I think the most unnoticed reason, very possibly, is the crews on this train. The crews on this train have a genuine interest in the North Country people up here.
To me, Craig is the Adirondack. Amtrak couldn't find a better person to represent them or the train. The other guys are very, very good too. It's a different atmosphere. It's so small, and the stations are so far apart. You have an opportunity to talk to them and get to know them as people. You know, it's not just the man that goes by in the blue polyester suit and takes the ticket. You know, you get to visit and hear about their children in school and, you know, what they're doing with their lives, and that's what makes it special.
Sue Vale is one of Craig Allen's passengers from Glens Falls. She rides the Adirondack as often as she can.
And I come to the train when I feel I need some inspiration and get things in perspective. The train is kind of my psychologist. I ride the train, listen to the whistle and the clickety-click, and I love it. I find it very soothing, very relaxing. Just sitting and looking out the windows is fabulous because there's so much out there to see. I'm happy on the train. It doesn't matter where it's going. I'm just happy to be in the train.
Ladies and gentlemen, the body of water next to us is Lake Champlain, 122 miles of it. The sixth largest lake in the United States, the largest lake outside of the Great Lakes.
There's definitely something out there. What it is, God only knows. There's too many people that have credibility to say, I've seen something out there, I've seen the head, I've seen the body, to say, no, it's not out there.
It is Champ, the legendary Lake Champlain creature that draws those curious about the unexplained to the lakeside community of Port Henry, New York. Brian Venn is a lifelong resident.
I haven't seen him personally, no. My wife has, my kids supposedly have had. I didn't see him. As far as what Champ actually is, fisheries biologists, Champ watchers, and Champ lovers are saying it's a plesiosaurus, which is pretty much the same as what is at Loch Ness, Lake Okeechobee up in British Columbia. They're all saying that they're the same species of dinosaur. They're a large animal, 30 foot in length, with a long neck, smaller head. Instead of arms, they have like a flipper type thing. The first documented case of seeing Champ was in 1609 by Samuel de Champlain, who explored the southern end of the lake. And since 1609, it's pretty much been random sightings. People that have seen Champ have never really went out and looked for him. Mostly passerbys have seen him taking photographs of Blaggy Bay in the Port Henry area. People on the train have seen him coming up on Adirondack. They're looking out, looking at the lake, and all of a sudden, pop, in the middle of nowhere, there's something that's not explained in the water. Not a duck, and it's not a current, and something is out there. But the thing is, there's just been so many sightings in the last 400 years that there's something out there.
While there is so much spectacular scenery to see from the train, to truly capture the Adirondack experience, you must leave it.
Okay, folks, station is Westport. Watch your step. Take care.
Westport
All right,
is
see you
the
again.
jumping-off point for
Bye.
exploring the northern Adirondack Park, including Lake Placid and Saranac Lake.
Bye, Sue.
Bye, Craig.
See you again.
Thanks. Yep,
Take care.
The town of Lake Placid, which is actually on Mirror Lake, is best known as the site of the 1932 and 1980 Winter Olympics. It's home to one of the U.S. Olympic training centers. Set amid the stunning landscape of the Adirondack Mountains, Lake Placid is a charming place to browse around or start a recreational adventure into the Adirondack wilderness.
There's something for everybody here. You can have the really old-fashioned Adirondack experience of this particular corner of the world where nothing really has changed.
Charlie Ritchie lives with his wife, Marianne, on the north end of Upper Saranac Lake. Camp Sandinona has been Charlie's family retreat for over 90 years.
I ended up here because I started here when I was three weeks old. I was brought up here by my parents and christened in a church just around the corner from here. And I've been here part of every year of my life since then, and have fallen in love with the place, clearly. My grandparents came up here in the early 1900s. My grandmother made the decision to buy this camp. I was fortunate enough to inherit the camp. I'm told, and I have no reason to not believe, that it's the oldest camp on the lake, dating back to around 1870.
At the turn of the century, people flocked to the Adirondack Lakes region. Among them were some of the wealthiest families in America. They built the great camps of the Adirondacks. More than just summer cottages, these were remarkable private estates. The affluent were afforded every comfort imaginable in the wilds of the Adirondacks.
A lot of very wealthy people had gotten wise to the idea that the Adirondacks had something special going, and people like the Vanderbilts and the Durants and the J.P. Morgan and the Whitneys and the Rockefellers all started buying large pieces of land of 50, 100,000 acres at a crack. And the whole Great Camp era started in the 1890s and continued right into early 1930s.
Typically, the centerpiece of the Great Camp was a huge lodge with bedrooms, bathrooms, and numerous fireplaces. Other buildings usually included a kitchen and banquet hall. For guests who didn't care for hiking, boating, or other outdoor pursuits, there were entertainment rooms and amusement halls. Architecturally, the styles of the Great Camps are eclectic. The most successful designs mirrored their rustic environment. The decorative finishing touches were done by local craftsmen.
In the old days, these camps had to be very self-sufficient. You didn't come to Upper Saranac Lake just for a weekend or a week. You came for a full summer. We would come up when school ended and go back just in time to go back to school. We boated and fished and swam and climbed the mountains, and from as long as I can remember, I would leave here with a heavy heart at the end of the summer and begin thinking about coming back right away. I knew it was the one place where my heart was, and I've traveled around the world a couple of times, and I've never seen any place in the world where everything comes together the way it does here. the water and the air and the trees and the smell is all part of one whole experience for me. Climbing a mountain or hiking a trail or swimming to the island or sailing the boat is just pure enjoyment. What more can you ask for?
The beauty and charm of Upper Saranac Lake is a treasure to behold. It's the largest of the North Adirondack lakes, with 5,500 acres of water surface and around 100 miles of shoreline, nearly 40% of which is set aside as forest preserve, protected by the New York Constitution as forever wild. Today, some 550 camps line the water. Many of them remain legacies of the original families. Several of them serve as recreational destinations for visitors. The Point was formerly known as Camp Wenundra. The eminent camp architect, William Diston, built this Adirondack dream house for William Rockefeller in the early 1930s. It is now one of the most exclusive and luxurious resorts in the country. The only year-round great camp resort is the Wabeek on Upper Saranac Lake. It was designed at the turn of the century in the rustic tradition by William Coulter, the pioneer great camp architect. Nancy Howard is part owner and manager of the Wabeek.
Guests get in touch with themselves in this environment. I cannot tell you how many guests will have read about the Adirondacks and fantasized about it and will arrive in the darkness of night and maybe think it would be nice to have a jacuzzi and look for a telephone and ask for the newspaper. And within a few days, they look so refreshed and invigorated by somehow having gotten in touch with themselves.
The Adirondacks have one last surprise to offer the traveler: the Ausable Chasm. The Ausable River has cut through this area for centuries, forming sandstone cliffs along its course, a spectacular wonder of nature, and perhaps America's oldest organized tourist attraction. This is the Grand Canyon of the East. Patricia Stone is the general manager of the Ausable Chasm Company.
We've been in continuous operation since 1870. The chasm remains a natural attraction where people can actually go and see the handiwork of nature. I think they experience a walk back in time, an area that has really remained untouched by any modern forces. The rock formations have been here long before any of us have been around. Elephant's Head would be one. It is a natural rock formation which definitely resembles the head of an elephant. And another one would be Jacob's Well. It was carved by, or created by, the swirling forces with possibly a small pebble to begin with. And it's made a hole about 6 feet deep and probably 3 feet in diameter.
This narrow part of the river we're now entering is called the Grand Flume. It's the narrowest and deepest part of the whole Ausable Chasm. Scarcely 12 feet wide, but there's over 60 feet of water beneath the boat right now.
I think anybody that's from a metropolitan area can't believe the peace and serenity of the Adirondacks in general. And they're really amazed that so much of it does remain forever wild in its natural state.
The final stretch of the journey to Canada parallels the shores of Lake Champlain. It's a spectacularly scenic ride with travel calendar views at every turn. The scenery and the rhythm of the rails invite a feeling of contemplative serenity. For the better part of 90 miles, the track hugs the lake's rocky western shore. The lake is named for the French explorer Samuel de Champlain, who visited it in 1609. Situated in a broad valley between the Adirondack and Green Mountains, the lake is bounded by Vermont to the east and New York to the west for most of its length. When the Adirondack finally parts company with Lake Champlain, it dashes through forests and across cornfields to the Canadian border.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. As you can see, we are just going over the St. Lawrence River with the skyline of Montreal off to our right, the final destination point for this evening's train. We'd like to wish you a pleasant stay in Montreal and hope you will consider Amtrak again in the near future. Madame et Monsieur, votre attention.
Montreal is a vibrant and beautiful French city that tastefully blends the old world with the new. Seductive in its charm, cosmopolitan in its spirit, eclectic in its cuisine, Montreal is a feast for the senses. It's an ideal final destination for what has been a splendid journey.
This program sponsored in part by Amtrak's Coast Starlight, traveling between Los Angeles and Seattle. You reach your destination the moment you step aboard.